In this week's episode, I'm joined by Bryan Samuel, Vice President for DEI at the University of Alabama in Huntsville. This week, our conversation is about the North Face incentivizing racial equity education, flexible scheduling at Land O'Lakes, Cole Brauer's sailing milestone, and more. Hey there, my name is Bernadette Smith. Welcome to 5 Things in 15 Minutes, my weekly show where I bring good vibes to DEI. That is good vibes to diversity, equity, and inclusion with a little dash of corporate social responsibility. What I've found is that there are lots of news stories about what's going wrong in the world and lots of negative data. But there are also a lot of things going right. That's what I like to focus on. I search for DEI stories that we can be inspired by and learn from. My hope is to inspire you to experiment with some of these inclusive actions and policies within your own organization to help you build a more inclusive world. Bryan, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. It's wonderful to be invited. And I always say you honor people when you invite them, and they honor you when they show up. So thank you for having me.
My pleasure. Will you tell folks a little bit about yourself and a little bit about your work?
Absolutely. I'm Bryan Samuel. I'm currently the Vice President for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at the University of Alabama in Huntsville. I've been in higher education for 30 years, beginning with advocating for myself. I'm a first generation African American young man with a disability, and I made a 12 on the ACT. So coming up, it was real hard for me to even gain admission, and many institutions told me I'd never graduate. Don't even try. You're wasting your time, and just find something else to do, right?
Mhm.
But needless to say, with a little resilience and grit and what I call 4Ds, I managed to eventually be admitted, graduated, get a bachelor's, a master's, and a PhD, and do what I love. I consider it my calling. I've been working in this space as a paraprofessional or professional since 1993. But of course, I always go back to that senior in high school who decided he wanted to go to college with a 12 on the ACT.
Awesome. That's an amazing story. You gave me goosebumps. And I have to ask, Bryan, what are the 4 Ds?
I like to think of this desire, right? You gotta have something that you want, and at the core of that desire, you gotta have a why. Why is it important to you? Why do you want it? What are you gonna do with it? That kind of thing. And then you gotta be disciplined, right? In my case, I found that some of my peers and classmates did not want to go to class on a pretty sunny day, and they didn't want to go to class when it was cold and raining, right? So they pretty much just didn't want to go to class. But you got to be disciplined. You got to do those things that you need to do when you need to do them, so that you can do those things that you want to do when you want to do them. You got to be determined. You can't let any little thing, get you off the road, right? You
Mhm.
know, I mean, you gotta be determined, so much so that if The Simpsons is on every Thursday night, or The Cosby Show, to date myself just a little bit, well, you can watch The Simpsons, or you can go to the library and write your paper, and do those different kind of things that need to be done. And you got to be determined. I'm a big proponent for higher education. I believe I would not be where I am. I would not enjoy the privileges that I have and some of the things that I'm able to do if I hadn't gone to college. But, as a college student, first generation African American male, low socioeconomic background, I had a lot of funny money, right? My money stayed funny. I never had quite enough. So a lot of the time I did without, but I was determined to
Mhm.
make it through. I was determined to get my bachelor's. I worked 2 or 3 jobs. I busted tables even before I got in college, but I kept busting tables as a college student and things of that nature. And I was determined. I was not going to have anyone turn me around. So I think if you got those 4 Ds, you can do anything.
I love that. Those are a great 4, Bryan. You know what? I think that there are a lot of folks who are feeling discouraged about the state of affairs, whether it's politics whether it's the overturning of affirmative action last year, which certainly impacts higher ed, which is your industry, layoffs of DEI employees. There's a lot of reasons to be discouraged. But I will tell you, I find a lot of reasons to be positive. And last week, I was with a client on site in a very conservative industry in a very conservative part of the country. And I was in a luncheon after my keynote. And one of the members of the senior leadership team said, when people ask me if we're going backward about DEI, I say we're only moving forward. We're doubling down. And this, again, from a white male executive in a conservative state, in a conservative industry, and very committed to this work. And I feel like there are a lot more people like him who are very committed to this work. And so, I am curious about what's been your experience in higher ed with the overturning of affirmative action and sort of what's bringing you hope, Bryan? How are you staying the course?
You know, we've had some highs and lows without question, right? Whether you're talking about the Bakke case in California in 1972, the Michigan decisions in the 90s, early 2000, the Grutz and Grudinger decisions, Michigan decisions. There's always some up and some down, but we continue to move forward. We will never be less diverse than what we are now, right?
Mm,
You ask all the demographers, and they're going to tell you we're only going to be more diverse 20, 30 years from now, right?
of
And
course.
so I am nothing if not optimistic and encouraged and resilient in those three, that the work that we do is going to be meaningful. And I like to look back and see all the things that DEI and the work that DEI has touched and where we are. And that keeps me going. When I see students graduating, a lot of first time in college students, first generation students like myself, financially challenged students, veterans, and others, certainly women in science and engineering and nursing and different places where historically one or more of these populations have not had good access or been excluded outright
Right.
in some cases, right? And I look at where they are now and what we're doing and how we are certain that when a student graduates from a university, not only have they mastered a program of studies, but they also know how to work well with people whose background and experiences are different than their own. And I
Mm-hmm.
tell people all the time, I don't know if you are a football fan or a basketball fan or a golfer. If you can think of this in terms of sports, right?
Mm-hmm.
Most people got some kind of sport, individual team sport that they follow, right? So here lately, we've been talking football because Super Bowl just happened and the Kansas City Chiefs won the Super Bowl. And so I asked a young lady at a presentation I was doing, I said, if you are a football fan, how would it work if your team consisted of 11 quarterbacks? You got 11 Patrick Mahomes out there on the field, right? So you got plenty of people who can throw the ball, but not very many who can catch it or run it or block and make sure that you can get to where you're trying to go for a first down or ultimately a touchdown. And if that's all you have, then it's going to be hard for your team to be successful. And conversely, the same is true on the defensive side of the ball and the special team side of the ball and all that kind of thing. And the teams who have the best diversity, they do well, right? You get your best quarterback, your best running back, your best lineman to block, and receivers to catch, and
They're
somebody.
balanced.
You're balanced. That's right. And so, my football days have long been over. Okay. But nowadays I try to play a little golf, and when I go out there, I get 14 clubs, and if I took 14 golf drivers, I'm probably gonna have a problem, right?
Mhm.
I'll be good off the tee probably, but in the fairway, the sand, the rough, or even on the green, I'm not going to be well prepared. So you need that diversity. Diversity gives us the greatest probability for solving teams and readying our workforce, right, for moving forward. And we always want to be moving forward in this
That's
thing
right.
called life, right? So I stay optimistic. I made a 12 on ACT. And I told my boss just the other day, we were talking about something, and he told me don't get discouraged or something. I said, well, hey, I made a 12 on ACT, and it takes a lot to to make me think, something's not going to work out.
Thank you, Bryan. On that note, let's move into this week's Good Vibes. The first story this week comes from the North Face, which in the UK is offering a 20% discount to customers who complete a 1 hour long racial inclusion course, which is aiming to foster equity in outdoor spaces. So there's a study that shows that there's a lot of very low engagement among Black and Asian folks in the outdoors, particularly in the UK. And this is one way the North Face is incentivizing inclusion. And I think it's really brilliant.
I love it, right? We never know what incentivizes a person, right? Sometimes it's money, sometimes it's a vacation day, sometimes it's a plaque or a certificate that they can hang on the wall. Sometimes it's just that intrinsic motivation of being told it's a good job by the right person, right? But anytime you can take an opportunity to engage more people meaningfully about race, culture, society, and those different things that can expand what they know about the social fabric of these United States and beyond, the world for that matter. That's always a good thing. So I was very excited to read that.
I know. It just felt so random to me, but I love it. Okay, the second story, a lot of these stories are random. Who am I kidding? The second story this week comes from Land O'Lakes, which moved away from rigid scheduling. They had 5 a.m. to 5 p.m. and 5 p.m. to 5 a.m. shifts. So they've moved away from this rigid scheduling within the manufacturing plants, which has allowed their workers much greater flexibility. So they started to do this because they had labor shortages, but now it's been rolled out to 60 sites, which has become this huge win-win for caregivers. And as a result, they're seeing happier, more committed workers, increased retention and productivity. And so it just required a little bit of flexibility on their end, right? It's just give and take.
I love it. For the longest time, businesses have been very stiff and rigid when it comes to, clock in, clock out, not 1 minute later than 5 o'clock, right? So anytime we give our employees an opportunity to balance those competing life priorities, that's always a win. It's especially good when you cannot always compete with, salary, right? If there's
Mm-hmm.
another company who can pay another $10 an hour, but yeah, they can't do this flexible scheduling like this to where you're going to get 10 more dollars an hour, but you're going to have to, hire somebody to come look after your loved one. And a
Right.
lot of people really take pride in doing that themselves, right? Looking out
Mm-hmm.
for their father or their mother or a spouse or a kid or something like that. So I love it. Anytime you can let your employees balance their competing life priorities, that's definitely going to be a win.
Love it. Very well said. All right. The third story comes from the Norway Sovereign Wealth Fund, a major global investor, which is now demanding gender diversity on their boards of emerging market companies. So let me explain this. So the fund has required representation on their company boards in markets in Europe and the US. So they're now requiring this gender balance in nations like India and Brazil. And so it's the same level of accountability across their portfolio. And I think it's very cool because it sort of sets a standard. And I think that we need to, again, incentivize incentivize diversity.
I love it. Every now and again, I find myself asking, what took so long, right? I mean,
Hmm.
why didn't we have this thing, 30 years ago? And probably about 10 years ago, I did this certification at Cornell University, their industrial labor relations department, where I got my certification in diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I learned at that time that, back in the 70s, there was a little computer company called IBM, and the company made all these big old mega frames, these mainframes, right,
Hmm.
for different business and what have you. And they had certainly computers in their office. And one of the secretaries to the vice president asked to have a computer made that she could use at home for budgeting and different little projects and different kind of things of that nature. And IBM said, well, no one wants to have a computer in their house, right? You know, and so they totally disregarded this young lady's ideal or request, primarily because she was a woman,
Mm.
right? Now, then came along probably about 10, 12 years later, a little company called Apple. And they decided that they would put a computer in everybody's house. And you go to look now, and most homes have 3, 4, 5 computer or technological
Mhm.
apparatus to help families stay connected and do the many different things that a family may do, right?
Mhm.
So I gave you that long, drawn out story because I think it's very critical and important to have a diversity of opinion and certainly have gender equity in all things. I,
That's
I
right.
really I really think that's true.
More successful outcomes, and it's just again about incentivizing kind of a whatever it takes. And you said before, different approaches work for different folks. And if the with the wealth fund has the money, they get to call those types of shots.
Absolutely.
The fourth story this week is about Cole Brauer, who recently made history becoming the first American woman to single handedly sail around the world. I'm going to read this very dramatically. Battling towering waves, equipment failures, and exhaustion, Brauer's solo odyssey defied maritime norms. With nerves of steel and sheer determination, she conquered the high seas, embodying the epitome of fearless exploration. Her trail beat blazing feet challenged the status quo, proving that grit, skill, and sheer badassery knows no gender.
Wow. Listen, hey, I don't have the words. That's tremendous. Anytime you can sail or swim or, because I think there was a young lady that swam from like Florida to Cuba or something like
Mm-hmm.
that.
Yep.
Maybe in the
Diana
80s.
Nyad. Yep. Diana
Yes,
Nyad. Yeah.
yes. That's badassery. I'll just if I can use that terminology that's in the story. Very inspiring, I'll say, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's a men's sport, right? And so that's what's really cool.
Very inspiring, and I'm sure going to motivate millions. Well, maybe not millions, certainly thousands of others to that they can do anything, right?
Exactly.
They can do anything.
All right, the last story this week comes from Philadelphia, where a new Popcorn for the People factory opened, offering hope and opportunity for the neurodiverse community. So this is backed by the Eagles Autism Foundation, Wawa, and Norian, and the factory is about hiring and training 25 autistic employees, and with each bag sold at Lincoln Financial Field and Wawa stores, $1 goes back into the Eagles Autism Foundation. So it's all about creating opportunity, creating jobs, creating skill building, keeping people employed, neurodiverse folks who are underemployed. I love it.
I love it. Research suggests that maybe 1 in 5, about 22, 23% of young people ages 18 to 24 and younger are neurodiverse, autism and such. And, we need to understand that better and do better. I did my master's I started in 93, and we had appraisal instruments and things to where we learned about the diagnostic and statistical manual of mental disorders. And, back in the 90s, 30 years ago, we weren't really good in this space, right? We
Mhm.
we had a lot to learn in this space. So I see now, particularly Huntsville, Alabama, doing a really good job in working with young people who are neurodiverse, and a lot of them are some brilliant minds, right? They do some
Yeah.
wonderful things. Um, Back when I was doing my master, I learned about Temple Grandin,
Mhm.
and Temple Grandin and the work that she did with the cattle industry, and
Mhm.
making it more humane and treating the cattle with dignity and
Mhm.
respect and things of that nature, and discovering some delicacies with the mountain oysters and things of that. A lot of good stuff came out of her work, and she was autistic, right?
Mhm.
And I'm sure there are dozens of others out there who have contributed to the fabric of society in a gigantic type of way that may have been neurodiverse as well. So I love this story. I really do.
Me too. And I've really enjoyed having you as a guest today, Bryan. Can you tell folks how they can keep in touch with you?
Absolutely. I have a website. It's findingmyself.org, findingmyself.org. And it's the home site for my book. I just recently wrote my book, Finding Myself, about my story, making the 12 on ACT and, coming into this space that I live and I call my passion, my calling, if you will, working in DEI and helping other people elevate, right? Helping, to serve others. I call myself a service leader, a servant leader, if you will. Other than that, I'm around and I'll be more than happy to speak with anybody. If they got any questions, they can just hit me up on the website.
Thank you, Bryan. It's been awesome having you. And folks, this week's call to action is a reminder that it is Ramadan. And I'm going to share in the show notes some tips for a Ramadan guide for your workplace. Great tips for everyone. So check that out. Folks, thanks for joining us. And if you don't already get the 5 Things newsletter, you can subscribe at 5thingsdei.com. Thanks so much. Have a great week. Thank you for listening to 5 Things in 15 Minutes. I hope you found yourself inspired by at least one of this week's stories. If you did, would you mind sharing it with a colleague and leaving us a review on your favorite podcasting platform? And if you don't already get my 5 Things newsletter, join at 5thingsdei.com. I'm Bernadette Smith, and I'll see you next week right here for 5 Things in 15 Minutes, bringing good vibes to DEI.